What's going on, everybody? Mr. Octagonal here, and we are back with the 3 Minutes on the Clock podcast, Season 2, episode number 8. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. This series, since the start of Season 2, we've only done NFL draft-related videos, but I do like to throw some NBA draft-related content in here and there. And since we're right in the middle of the NFL Scouting Combine, I figured it'd be a good time to do an NBA mock because I feel like it's an awful time to do an NFL mock draft at this point, since we still got pretty much all the defensive positions left to do testing for the Combine, and then I don't want to do winners and losers yet. I'd rather just wait until the whole Combine is over. So that's why we're not going to have an NFL draft video today. That's why we're going to do NBA. One round, no trades. I'm using the current standings as of last night, so these are accurate. Obviously, there will be a draft lottery, so the order will probably look nothing like this, but this is the best I can do, so just go with it, I suppose. With the first pick, the Golden State Warriors are going to select James Wiseman, the center from Memphis, and even though this is a weak class without star power, that makes the number one pick a lot of fun because there's parity and there's no obvious number one overall pick. And the last time we've had that in the NBA was back in 2013 when the Cavs picked up Anthony Bennett. And I mean, since then, the top pick has been obvious every year. Andrew Wiggins, Karl-Anthony Towns, Ben Simmons, Markelle Fultz, DeAndre Ayton, Zion Williamson. All six of those guys we knew were going number one. And when we heard their names, it was no surprise. And the correlation between this class and the 2013 class is both, at the time, looked very weak. Now, obviously, the 2013 one has developed pretty nicely. Victor Oladipo's an all-star. CJ McCollum's a good player. Rudy Gobert is a two-time Defensive Player of the Year. And oh yeah, there's also a MVP winner in Giannis Antetokounmpo, who will likely be a two-time MVP winner in about 3 months from now. So that class has developed quite nicely, but at the time, during the draft, it did look weak. And this class, as of right now, on paper, does look pretty weak. There's no guys like Zion Williamson who are these amazing stars. No guys like Luka Doncic, who is, for me, the greatest prospect I have ever scouted. I was super high on Luka coming out of wherever he played in, somewhere out there in Europe. But I was very high on him, and I've obviously been proven right so far. I would have picked Luka at the time over DeAndre Ayton, but that's besides the point. So the reason why the Warriors are going to go Wiseman here is based on their current situation. If the Warriors were planning on keeping this as a multi-year rebuild, I think a guy like Anthony Edwards would be the pick. However, since they plan on trying to contend for a championship next year, I think it will be Wiseman because they need a center more than they need wings. I mean, already, 1 to 4, you got Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, and Draymond Green as your starting lineup with Eric Paschall, Jordan Poole, and some other young pieces off the bench. So other than center, the Warriors are set. And while drafting for need this high is always a bad idea, teams as good as the Warriors usually don't pick this high. And I think they can be an exception to the rule here and select a guy like Wiseman. And the Warriors have never really had a dominant center during their late 2010s dynasty. I mean, the starters were guys like Zaza Pachulia, JaVale McGee, and then last year an injured DeMarcus Cousins, along with some other young players like Kevon Looney and Damian Jones. So the Warriors have never really had any great centers, and Wiseman has the chance to be great. He only played 3 games in college. He was outstanding in all 3 games, putting up nearly 20 and 10 and only 23 minutes per game. I understand that's a small sample size, and I'm not taking his college credentials too seriously. However, he did show a ton of potential, was the number 1 player in the class coming out of high school, and he's just a dominant big man. He doesn't really have a great outside game yet, but inside he is a problem. And he has a chance to be one of the best centers in the league very quickly, in my opinion. And I think just based on where their team is right now, I think this is a good selection. They could look at trading the pick. I think that's a bad idea unless they get an offer that blows them away. But Anthony Edwards could make sense here. And the reason why I don't think they're going to pick Edwards is, I mean, look at their wing situation. Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins are great. However, Klay Thompson's coming off a torn ACL. He's on the wrong side of 30, and I don't see Andrew Wiggins being on this team in 5 years from now. So I think Edwards could be the selection because I don't think either of those guys are, as I said, going to be on the roster or at least be anywhere as good in 5 years from now. So I think Edwards could make sense, especially if they were a rebuilding team. But since they're not, I do think Wiseman will be the pick. At the second selection, the New York Knicks select LaMelo Ball, point guard from the Illawarra Hawks in Australia. LaMelo is my number one player in the class. He reminds me, I'm not necessarily fully comparing him to Trae Young, but there are some correlations. They have very similar games, with the only differences being LaMelo's bigger, LaMelo's more athletic, which does help him on the defensive end of the floor. Not only is he a better one-on-one defender, but he can also switch on the perimeter as well to bigger guys, whereas Trae Young would be more of a liability. I understand LaMelo Ball has never really been great at defense, but I think he has more defensive upside. And then offensively, they're both very good scorers. I think the only difference is LaMelo is not super efficient from deep. And we know LaMelo can shoot it. I mean, the kid, he was nailing half-court shots with ease in high school, and he's a very, very talented shooter with very high volume. It's just the efficiency isn't really there. He can get hot and cold at times, whereas Trae Young is one of the best shooters in the NBA without much of a question mark. So I think while LaMelo's shooting could hurt him early on in his career, efficient shooting is something that can be taught. Athleticism and size cannot be taught. If you told me I would be saying that LaMelo Ball is the number one player in the draft 2 years ago, I'd be saying you were crazy. 2 years ago, I thought LiAngelo was the better prospect than LaMelo, and things have changed. With the third pick, the Cleveland Cavaliers select Anthony Edwards, shooting guard from Georgia. Most people have Edwards number one on their board. For me, he is at the number 2 spot. I'm not as high on Edwards as others. I do see the potential, though. He's a very good athlete, nice scorer. And I think the Cavs definitely have to go the best player available, and I think he is the best player available by a mile. I think these three guys have really set themselves apart from the rest of the draft class, Wiseman, LaMelo, and Anthony Edwards. But Edwards is one of those prospects you see in the top 5, but isn't a guy who brings a whole lot of star power with him. Sort of like R.J. Barrett from last year. To be fair, Barrett did go to Duke. More people knew R.J. Barrett last year than people know Anthony Edwards, but R.J. was overshadowed by Zion. So Barrett wasn't really talked about as a generational prospect, and he wasn't. And neither is Anthony Edwards. Now, if I were to choose one, I probably would pick R.J. Barrett, but they do have some similarities, sort of like these guys, like an Andrew Wiggins. I'm not comparing Edwards to R.J. or Wiggins at all. I'm just saying that he's one of those guys who comes out and has a high floor, has a nice skill set, but probably won't turn into a superstar. Another example, I think, could be a guy like Victor Oladipo. And I do think that is more of a fair comparison for a guy like Anthony Edwards. Looking at the Cavs situation, I mean, you got Garland and Sexton at the point guard, or at the guard spots. They're both natural point guards, but neither of them, especially Colin Sexton, are phenomenal playmakers. They're both score-first guards, and I sort of questioned the fit a little bit. I questioned it when they picked Garland. I would have picked a guy like Jarrett Culver there. Not that Culver has been spectacular by any means with Minnesota, but at the time I thought that did make more sense, and even now I still question the fit a little bit. So I think adding another guard just in case is helpful, and then obviously they also drafted Kevin Porter Jr. last year late in the first round, who's turned out to be a steal. And this one did not come out of left field. I saw this one coming from a mile away. Kevin Porter Jr. is one of my favorite players in that draft. I would have been happy if my Pistons took him at 15. He was one of the 2 or 3 players who I was really hoping we would take. Number 1 was Sekou Doumbouya. I was happy about the pick at the time, and I still am. We'll talk about the Pistons in a minute, but nonetheless, I do think this is a nice selection for Cleveland. So after that, the draft really starts to get interesting. There's a bunch of guys at that second tier of talent. Minnesota gets the first swing, and they're going to go with Obi Toppin, the power forward out of Dayton, and he has been the biggest riser out of anybody in this class. Yes, they do need a point guard, and there are plenty of options, but they do have another first-round pick in the middle of the first round, and I still think there are going to be a few options left for them. So they're going to go with Toppin, who, in my opinion, is the National Player of the Year. The kid's been sensational for Dayton. Dayton has as good of a chance as anybody to win the NCAA tournament, and Dayton's a very, very well-rounded team, but they are led by an absolute star. and Obi Toppin, who is absolutely phenomenal and has really put himself into this top 5 consideration. At number 5, the Atlanta Hawks are going to go with Onyeka Okongwu from USC center, power forward. I'm a little bit concerned about the fit with him and Clint Capella, but I don't know how long-term Capella will be there, and I don't think there are many other options with this pick for Atlanta. Maybe a guy like Deni Avdija to continue to space the floor, something that Atlanta's really prioritized in their drafts. But I think they need to get a big for the future, and I don't think that really is going to be Clint Capella, who, while he is solid, he's sneaky young. He's only like 24, 25. I think, based on the year Onyeka Okongwu has, I think the Hawks might pick him here. Onyeka reminds me a lot of Bam Adebayo. Both are smaller centers. Bam is only like 6'9", 6'10". Onyeka is only about 6'9". A lot of people have him listed as a power forward. I think he's a little bit more of a center, considering what we've seen from a guy like Bam Adebayo. And I think while the fit between him and Capella will be awkward early, I think for the immediate future, you can have Okongwu come off the bench. I don't think he's ready to really be a 30 minutes per game starter quite yet. And then long-term, he can be groomed as the starting center. And as I said, I don't really see Capella being the future there. With the 6th pick, the Detroit Pistons select Killian Hayes, a point guard from Ratio Farm I hope I said that right, from France. And the Pistons, they need to draft high-ceiling players. They did last year in Sekou Doumbouya, and he has clearly showcased some talent this year, especially in the early part of January. I mean, he was putting up excellent numbers, and he looked like a future star out there. And the past month and a half has been a little bit rocky with him. His confidence is really not there, and I don't think that's his fault. I think a lot of it has to do with the coaching staff. I don't think Dwayne Casey is really helping that. And while Casey is a good coach, I don't think Casey is very good for the young guys. And I feel like Dwayne Casey is really putting too much of an emphasis on winning rather than just trying to develop some of the young guys like Sekou Doumbouya, like Svi Mykhailiuk. And while obviously as a coach, your goal is to go out there and win, even if the front office is tanking, obviously Dwayne Casey wants to win, and I get that. But at the same time, I think he needs to try to prioritize the young guys in the game plan, and I really feel like he's not doing that, which is hurting their confidence. And that's why I'm not sold on Casey, and I think this has not been the start that we wanted for Sekou, but the potential and the talent is absolutely there. So I think adding another high-ceiling player in Killian Hayes does make sense, because where the Pistons are at, they don't really have a lot of young pieces for the future. I mean, there are some talented players. Svi, Bruce Brown, Christian Wood has been a pleasant surprise. Those are good players, but nothing to really brag about. And the Pistons need to really hit on a couple of these first-round picks to turn into great players. And Hayes has one of the highest ceilings in this draft class. Pick 7, the Chicago Bulls are up. That is a broken record. This would be the 4th straight season that the Bulls would have the 7th pick. And to be fair, they've done well with their past 3 7th overall picks. In 2017, they got Lauri Markkanen, who's been a disappointment this year, but still good. 2018, Wendell Carter, who's been good. 2019, Kobe White, who's been excellent since the All-Star break. And this time, they're going to go with Deni Avdija, a small forward from Maccabi Tel Aviv in Israel. Slow start this season for Deni, but he's really picked it up, and he's really starting to play well. Definitely a guy who could space the floor, solid athleticism, solid defender, and I think he probably has the highest ceiling of anybody left on the board. And the Bulls, I think, they've drafted well these past couple years, but they don't have a superstar. We were hoping Lauri Markkanen would really develop into one this year. He is not, but I think they're a superstar or two away from really having something special. I think Deni Avdija could be just that. Pick 8, Isaac Okoro from Auburn to the Charlotte Hornets. Okoro's had a really nice season for the Tigers, not putting up crazy numbers, but he's one of those guys that's going to be benefited from having a weaker draft class rather than being a late lottery pick, early to mid-teens. He's going to go in the top 10, and I think considering where this class is, I guess you could say it is deserving that he's going to be in the top 10. For Charlotte, they're not in a great position right now, but they do got some talented young players. Devontae Graham has been spectacular this season. Rock Chalk. P.J. Washington's been good. Miles Bridges has been good. So they have some young pieces to build around, but they're missing a couple guys, and I think they could use someone like Isaac Okoro. Pick 9, Washington Wizards select Tyrese Halliburton, point guard from Iowa State. I understand John Wall and Bradley Beal are both guards. I understand that's their strength. They need pretty much anything else, maybe except for a forward. Rui Hachimura, I think, has one of those forward spots locked up. He's been very underrated this season. But I think it might be starting to be the time to think about moving on from John Wall. He's coming back from an Achilles injury next year, and based on how he plays his game, I think he will decline. He also only has 1 year left on his contract, after this season, that is. And I think adding a guy like Halliburton could be really, really useful. Sort of has the skill set of a guy like Draymond Green. Not going to score a bunch of points, but he plays well defensively. He can switch to almost any position on the defensive end of the floor. Excellent playmaker. Does really everything well. Has size, athleticism. Just not a crazy, crazy scorer, which I think is good for a team that has a guy like Bradley Beal, who is a scoring threat. So I think the fit here would be really fun to see. And I think this would be a nice pick for Washington. And with the 10th pick, RJ Hampton, point guard from the New Zealand Breakers. Hampton hasn't nearly been as good as LaMelo Ball in the same league, the NBL, I think that's what it's called. I don't know. But the Suns have needed a point guard for a while. Really, ever since Steve Nash left, they've never really had that guy at the point guard position. They drafted Ty Jerome this year. He hasn't really turned into anything yet. So I think they're going to go with Hampton here. They have options here, though. They could go with a guy like Theo Maledon, Cole Anthony. There are multiple talented point guards still left on the board, Nico Mannion as well, but I think they're going to go with Hampton, who might have the highest ceiling of the group. With the 11th pick, the San Antonio Spurs, who have not had a lottery pick and who knows how long, are going to select Saddiq Bey, a small forward from Villanova. Bey is one of my favorite players in this draft class. He's extremely well-rounded, and considering this is a weak class, I don't know how he isn't in lottery consideration yet, and I think he'll continue to play well and really rise his stock these next couple of weeks as we head into March and March Madness tournament. And I think if Villanova goes far, I think Bey will be one of the big reasons why. San Antonio's really drafted a ton of wings these past couple years, and a lot of wings with upside. Lonnie Walker has a ton of potential. Keldon Johnson, Luka Šamanić. I understand Šamanić isn't really a wing, but I think he plays like more of a prototypical wing than a big. But I think they could use another one. I don't see all three of those guys developing. Maybe one or two turn into something. But I think while they've really focused on high ceiling guys these past couple years, I think they're going to go for more of a high floor type player in Bey. Speaking of high ceiling guys, Jaden McDaniels at 12 to the Sacramento Kings. I think the Kings need to go out and really try to find a star. De'Aaron Fox is good, but not great. Marvin Bagley, I think, will be good, but not great. Buddy Hield is good, but not great. Common theme here. The Kings have some good players, but nobody who I think will really be a number one option on a championship team. And while I'm not saying McDaniels will be that, he has more upside than probably anyone else on the board at the moment. And he's very raw, he's very lean, and he hasn't been great at Washington, but the upside and the potential is there, and I think the Kings really have to swing for the fences with this selection. Pick 13, Devin Vassell, shooting guard from Florida State to the Blazers. He just had a really nice season, phenomenal scorer, well-rounded player, and Florida State's a big sleeper. I understand they are ranked pretty high, but they're not really being talked about. And they have a few really, really good pieces, and I'd say their best player right now is probably Devin Vassell, who's really cemented himself as a lottery pick. I think the Blazers could use a couple guys who can really come off the bench and really be a spark plug. I think Anthony Simons has that potential in the next few seasons, but I think adding another guy like Vassell could be useful, and then maybe groom him to be the long-term shooting guard. I don't really know how much longer they're going to keep a guy like CJ McCollum, who's a good player, but if they don't start winning, I think they're going to potentially trade a guy like CJ and try to get some younger pieces while still building around Damian Lillard. And I think adding a guy like Vassell here does make sense. And then pick 14, Jamius Ramsey, shooting guard from Texas Tech to the Pelicans. Ramsey's been inconsistent, but the potential is there, and that goes with a lot of guys in this draft class. Super inconsistent, but you know there is some upside. And for the Pelicans, I think they have a ton of great pieces, and that goes without saying. Lonzo Ball's had some good moments this year. Drew Holiday is still a very good player. Brandon Ingram has asserted himself into an all-star. Jackson Hayes is a good young player. Nickeil Alexander-Walker as well. And oh yeah, they have a guy named Zion Williamson on that team who has been a monster. 10 straight games of 20 straight points That doesn't make sense. 10 straight games of 20 points. Excuse me. In other words, Zion Williamson's a stud. He is absolutely was advertised out of college. And I think the Pelicans just need one or two more pieces. And I think going for a guy like Ramsey does make sense. Now, out of a lottery, starting with Minnesota, they got this pick from Atlanta in the 4-team deal where they acquired Malik Beasley, who's been great, by the way, along with Juan Hernangomez, and that sent Robert Covington to Houston, Clint Capella to Atlanta. They got this pick. And originally, the Hawks got the selection from Brooklyn, I think in exchange for Taurean Prince, I want to say. So this is technically Brooklyn's pick, but Minnesota got it from Atlanta. They're going to go with Theo Maledon, point guard from Asvel in France. They still have options. Cole Anthony is still on the board. Nico Mannion, still on the board. But I have them going with Maledon, who I think has a higher ceiling than both of them. Anthony has been super inconsistent. Nico Mannion has really shot himself down the boards these past couple of weeks after really playing strong to start the season. And the Timberwolves are getting a guy with very, very nice upside. And I think having a backcourt of him, D'Lo, and Malik Beasley could be really useful. Pick 16, Cole Anthony, point guard, North Carolina, to the Orlando Magic, sorry. I understand Markelle Fultz has played well this year, but Cole Anthony and Markelle Fultz are very different players, and I think they can complement each other well. Anthony's more of a prototypical point guard, not a phenomenal playmaker, but he's a score-first guy. He's going to score the ball very, very well, whereas Markelle Fultz, not really known as a shooter, but he's more athletic, a little bit better of a passer, and then better on the defensive end of the floor. So I think those two guys can complement each other pretty well. At pick 17, the Boston Celtics select Isaiah Stewart, a power forward from Washington. And I could almost list him at center. I think he's the poor man's version of Onyeka Okongwu in this class. And the Celtics have been very, very good this season. But all they're missing is size. And they've really, really missed Al Horford. Yeah, he has not been great in Philly, but they have missed his impacts. And I think getting a guy like Isaiah Stewart here does make sense. He has a pretty nice ceiling. I think he's quite raw right now, but he does have good upside. Pick 18, the Milwaukee Bucks. They got this pick from Indiana and the Malcolm Brogdon sign and trade. They're going to pick Aleksej Pokusevski from Olympiakos B in Greece. This kid is one of my favorite players in the draft class. He is a 7-footer who can let it fly. I mean, he can shoot the ball very well. He has nice athleticism. He moves quickly for a guy who's 7 foot. You can put him on the perimeter. You can put him inside. For me, he is a lottery prospect, borderline top 10 guy. I think the question is the competition he's playing. While he is playing pro ball, I don't think he's playing in one of the top leagues in Europe, sort of like Luka Doncic was when he was coming out of the draft. He was obviously in one of the top He was in the top European league, which is why it was so crazy. He was so good there at a young age. And Pokusevski is a little bit raw, but I really like him, and he's one of my favorite players in this class, and I think a team of the lottery should take a chance on him. So, the rich get richer, I guess. For Bucks, the best team in the NBA this season, get an absolute steal. Pick 19, Daniel Oturu, center from Minnesota, to the Dallas Mavericks. I think they could use another big guy. They've been starting Dwight Powell before he got hurt, and Powell isn't bad, but I think they need another long-term big next to Kristaps Porzingis, and I think that can be Oturu. He's had a really, really nice season this year at Minnesota. His stock is very confusing. I've seen mock drafts that have him in the second round. I've seen mock drafts that have him in the top 10. And I don't think either of those spots are really fair value for Oturu. And I think right around the 19 or 20 spot as of now is a good spot for him. And then pick 20, Tyrese Maxey, shooting guard from Kentucky to the Thunder. Maxey's a very dynamic scorer. He doesn't bring a whole lot else, but he can score in bunches. And the Thunder are getting a guy who can really come off the bench and put up some points for them. And I think Maxey has a nice ceiling to potentially be an 18, 19 points per game guy in the league. I think he just needs to refine the rest of his game. And if he improves throughout the rest of the season, I think he could end up being a lottery pick when it's all said and done. Now we're going to finish up the rest of the mock draft. Remember, this is only one round. I'll probably have 2-round mocks closer to the NBA draft itself, but for right now, we are only sticking with one. Starting with the Brooklyn Nets here at pick 21. They're going to go with Precious Achiuwa from Memphis. he's been a little bit disappointing, but hasn't been terrible this year by any stretch of the imagination. And for a team like the Nets, I think it's certainly good to add more pieces, especially a versatile one in Achua, who I think can defend multiple positions, nice athleticism, decent scorer, and could be a pretty big impact early on. Pick 22, the Nico Mannion slide comes to an end. He's going to go to the Miami Heat, who I think are in need of a new playmaking point guard. Nico might be the best pure passer in the draft. A lot of these point guards are score-first guys. Nico Mannion is not one. He's putting up solid scoring numbers, about 14 a game, I think, but not the best scorer. He's not a guy who's going to put up ridiculous scoring averages in the NBA, but I think he'll make a lot of his money making plays for his teammates rather than making the plays for himself. Pick 23, Tyler Bey, small forward from Colorado to the Jazz. No relations to Saddiq Bey. I don't think they're related. But Tyler Bey is a really, really solid player. I mean, for one thing, he's a phenomenal rebounder. Only like 6'6", 6'7". That man's a double-double machine. Very athletic, one of the better athletes in the draft, and is the main reason why Colorado's actually been sneaky good this year. And I could see them performing pretty well in the tournament. Pick 24, one of the most interesting players in this draft class, in my opinion, Aaron Nesmith, small forward out of Vanderbilt to the Nuggets. Naismith shot about 53% from three this year, which is absolutely absurd. I understand he suffered a foot injury back in early January and hasn't played since. So it is a small sample size, but I mean still, that's ridiculous. He averaged 23 a game before getting hurt in 14 games, so that's not a totally small sample size, and he took 115 threes. So it's not like Bol, who finished 13 of 25 from three last year. It's not like James Wiseman, who put up ridiculous numbers in 3 games. No, this is 60 for 115 from three. And remember, the three-point line in college was pushed back this year from about 19 feet to about 21. So that's absolutely absurd. And the fact that the Nuggets get him at 24 is not fair. This kid is a stud. He's going to put up scoring numbers in the NBA. 25, Oklahoma City Thunder select Jalen Smith, power forward / center from Maryland. He has a little bit of a perimeter game, but he's at his best inside. He's been a really productive player these past couple of seasons. I think this is great value. Phenomenal shot blocker, phenomenal inside defender. He can go up and catch lobs. Super athletic. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes earlier than 25 when it's all said and done. Pick 26, Amar Sia from Oostende in Belgium. Sia is a native of Senegal, not of Belgium, but nonetheless, the Knicks get themselves a talented player with a pretty nice ceiling to pair up with LaMelo Ball and the rest of their young core. Pick 27, Devon Dotson, power forward from Kansas. As you all know, I'm a diehard Jayhawks fan. I love me some D-Dot. I think he's the best NBA prospect on the team. As good as Udoka as Abuike is, that kid's a stud. I don't really see his game translating into the modern NBA. I do see Devon Dotson's, however. I think Dotson, he's been really, really good these past 2 seasons for the Jayhawks. I think he'll be a really good player off the bench in this league. I don't see him ever being a phenomenal starter, but I think he can be a key rotation guy for a while. Pick 28, Vernon Carey, center from Duke. He's been Duke's best freshman this season, which I suppose is unfortunate for them. They have not had the star power of freshmen like they usually do. I mean, last year they had the big 3 of Zion, RJ, and Cam Reddish. And I think all 3 of them would easily be the number 1 option on that team this season. But nonetheless, Vernon Carey, old school player, he does try to really stretch his game on the perimeter. I mean, he's taken threes this year, and I think he'll translate quicker than a guy like Isaiah Stewart or Onyeka Okongwu to the league. So I think the Raptors are getting a really good value pick here at 28. And while I think the late part of the top 10 isn't great, I think there's still a lot of depth here at the end of the first round. If I'm a team at like 12 or 13, I tried to trade down to this area of the draft, like 25, 26, 27, because I think the players here at the late first round aren't that much worse than the guys in the middle of the first round. Pick 29, Cassius Stanley, shooting guard from Duke. He is a pogo stick. The kid can absolutely jump out of the gym. A native of LA, he gets to return home as he will be a Los Angeles Laker. I think he has a ton of upside. He's shown flashes at Duke, but has been raw. but I do think this will be a solid pick for the Lakers. And then pick 30, Patrick Williams, small forward from Florida State to the Celtics. I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with Williams, but I do plan on doing a more in-depth scout of him within the next couple of weeks for sure. He's a player I'm very curious about, and he has played pretty well this season at Florida State, one of their higher options. But nonetheless, I do think this would be a pretty solid pick for the Celtics, knowing the few things about Patrick that I do. So that'll end the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already. And as always, have a good one. Peace out. Also, Combine recap video should be up probably on Tuesday or Wednesday, so stay tuned.